We are recording.
Okay. All right, thanks. So tonight we are welcoming County Commissioner and Chair of the BOCC, Anna Prizzia. So Anna is our local go-to expert on food systems. She has 20 plus years of experience in sustainability efforts, including working as a statewide coordinator for the Florida Farm to School program. She works with several nonprofits and community organizations to support local food efforts and food access and economic opportunity, including one of my favorites is Working Food. And she founded and continues to oversee the UF-IFAS Fork and Field and Fork program, which provides collaborative and educational opportunities to those interested in sustainable agriculture and food systems. Tonight, she's here to talk to us about the sales surtax the Alachua County voters approved last November and how that money will be used to improve our parks and to purchase conservation land and how this all might tie into local agriculture. So Anna, thank you for being here and you may start.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate the time and I am very excited at the interest in agricultural lands protection as well as conservation lands and parks. So I am going to start by just setting some context, and in full transparency, our amazing land conservation staff did most of the heavy lifting on all these statistics. I am just sort of regurgitating some of the information that they have given me. And then once I've kind of chatted a little bit and then given you a bit of my soapbox, I'll open it up and we can have more of a conversation if that's okay. So Alachua County forever, as you know, has been around for several decades now, and it has been a powerhouse in protecting conservation lands in our county, in partnership with Alachua Conservation Trust and state and other regional entities like Water Management District and the DEP and state parks. We've managed to acquire a little over 27% of the conservation land in Alachua County. Woo, woo. So I'm very proud of that. We're almost to 30 by 30 already. So it makes me very proud. But when you look at the priority areas that were so when we originally did Alachua County Forever, there was a study done to create a map of priority areas of lands that were high priority for conservation. It wasn't individual parcel definite, it was parcel, it was defined by parcel, but it was done at sort of a broad county-wide scale. The majority of those properties, as you probably know, kind of wrap around the eastern side of our county down near like Alachua and Orange Lake, and kind of scoop up around the eastern side of the county and then travel along the Santa Fe River to the north. When you look at that map and those areas that were originally set for conservation, there's still over 150,000 acres that have not been acquired. So while we have acquired quite a bit, we're still a long way from meeting the goal of acquiring all of those conservation lands. When you look at kind of the acquisitions that we have done with just wild spaces, public places from 2016 till now, so the most recent iteration, we're at about where are we at? Let's see. We're at about, I'm sorry, I apologize. Oh, here we go. We're at about 13,168 acres. And an additional 447 acquired by partners. So a total of about 13,500 acquired just in this last go round. And that equals about a little over $40 million in acquisition. And that's 27 properties. So they've really been kicking butt. I mean, that's a lot of work. Again, the total amount that we've acquired to date is 32,687 acres. So on our active acquisition list, so we have an active acquisition list, which is, and this is all conservation, and I'll get to why this matters in a minute. Our active acquisition list is about, meaning properties that have already been nominated to Alachua County Forever for acquisition and are waiting, either because we're waiting for a willing seller, or because, there's some issue with title work or whatever. we have currently on that list 40,000, a little over 40,000 acres on the current active acquisition list. So if you just look at sort of the properties that we have, and then the properties that we just have in kind of of current, sort of that are in the pre-negotiation phase or negotiation phase that are kind of already being acquired, we have another 13,000 acres. So we're like cranking, yeah. The total amount of money that we're projected to have for the 10-year Wild Spaces Surtax Fund for the half that will be for parks and conservation is 194 million. That's the county's portion. Of that, 6 million of that comes right off the top for partnership projects with municipalities. So that was a commitment we made when we created the surtax, and those typically go to partnership projects, parks projects, so we will have 6 million off the top of our 194. So we'll be down to, what does that take us down to? 188 million. And then that money, the 188 million or so, gets split between parks and conservation. And we just recently, the reason that I postponed this meeting is because I wanted to make sure we had our county commission discussion, and you may or may not have heard, because I believe Janice was there. But we did have that discussion, and we voted to do an 80-20 split. 80% conservation lands, 20% parks. And so that is less than the last go round. The last go round was 90-10. So we did give more money to active recreation and parks this go round than we have in the past. And that was for two reasons. That's one, because we now have a parks master plan and we have a better understanding of the recreational needs in our county. And two, because we're rapidly urbanizing and the need for active recreational space in the unincorporated area that is within our growth management zone is pretty high. And so, but we kept it at 80-20 because we also realized, some of the folks on the board were kind of almost advocating for 50-50 or 60-40 or, much higher splits. And the case that was made, and I think effectively by myself and a few others, was that our conservation lands are recreation as well. And the majority of the surveys that we saw and the information that we saw from people was what they were really seeking was just to get out in nature, to have trails to walk on, to have open spaces to explore and to enjoy, and that our conservation lands could serve that purpose as well as our active rec spaces, and that we needed to do a better job this go around of making sure that when we open a park that we have all of those things in place, like that when we have conservation lands, it's hard to get those open. There's a lot of work that goes into that. You're cutting trails in natural areas, you're having to put in parking lots and things that take a lot of infrastructure and a lot of money, and our conservation staff tend to be focused on more land, more protection, and less on the recreation component. So we really emphasized that this time and ask them to have an emphasis on making sure that those recreational assets are a part of the conversation when we're acquiring and improving properties. Let's see. So when you look at the map, as I mentioned, that Santa Fe River corridor up around, when you're kind of up around like Alachua and High Springs, down La Crosse and all the way down following the Santa Fe River around, and then wrapping around the eastern side of our county, you get this kind of what our staff have been terming the green crescent, which is sort of the area that they have been focused on, because those are the areas that are big, wet, and cheap, essentially. They get a bang for their buck, because a major point of our mission is to protect our water resources, and those wetlands are, the filter for our water. And so to protect those watersheds and those wetlands is really, really important. And because much of that land is wet, it's not super developable. And so it ends up being the priority target for a lot of our conservation acquisition. In addition to that, it also overlaps with a number of other programs including the wildlife corridors that are a priority for the state, and our conservation and open space element priorities. So we have a lot of kind of overlapping things that sort of point towards those areas being really important areas to protect. And those are the areas that are easiest to get matching dollars from the state and as well. However, then now we get to the ag part. The western side of our county, on the other hand, is high and dry. And when you get kind of past I-75, what happens is that something called the Hawthorne layer, which is a clay layer that was formed in prehistoric times, that forms sort of a almost like a lens in it. That lens is what holds all the water to the surface. It's why we have lakes and wetlands on the eastern side of our county, but not on the western side of the county, because that clay layer disappears. And so essentially we have sand on the western side of our county, and which means it's a high recharge area. It's an area where water can rapidly infiltrate into the ground, which means there aren't a lot of rivers and lakes and wetlands, but it also means it's still a really important area to protect for water quality. Because if we develop all that land, we pave over our recharge area for our aquifer. The challenge is that area is very developable, so that land is a lot more expensive. It's very parcelized, so a lot of it's split up, right? It's been subdivided a lot and split up a lot. Additionally, a lot of that land out there, unfortunately, as we are seeing all the development happening, has been entitled, has been, sort of people already have entitled it with development plans and have, and so it's a harder space to do acquisition in. And it has less connectivity to other priority areas. So because there's so much parcelization, because there's so much development, it's hard to have corridors for wildlife. It's hard to have connectivity to other natural areas, which is something that scores really well in our conservation program. So additionally, because most of it was cleared for agriculture at one time, and much of it is still agriculture, it doesn't often score well on our matrix. When we started Alachua County Forever and Wild Spaces, we created an as objective as it can be, matrix that our staff use. They go out onto the property and they score the property based on the criteria that were developed. And then that score gets presented to our Land Conservation Board, and our Land Conservation Board makes the determination on whether to recommend it for addition to our acquisition list. And then that comes to us, we approve the addition of it to our acquisition list, and that's when our staff can then actively pursue it. And then once they have, real numbers, they bring those back to us and we approve the actual acquisition of the project. However, most of the lands on the western side of our county, because they've been cleared for ag at one time or another, and they may not have some of the like wetlands and creeks and streams and things like that on them, often don't score well if they're put into this matrix. And so I think that where we are right now is that we understand the importance of protecting the western side of our county as a complement to protecting water quantity and water quality for our county. We understand the importance of protecting our agricultural lands for local food security, for local resilience, and also just to create a buffer and to protect the rural character of Alachua County and not have us turn into Miami-Dade or Fort Lauderdale. Luckily, the growth management area that our voters voted in also helps with that. But we are stuck in a situation where we have two things that are kind of fighting with each other, right? We had two things that were kind of pulling, I wouldn't say fighting, are competing, our parks and our conservation lands, competing. Now we have three things that are potentially competing, right? We have conservation land, parks, and farmland. And in order to really do farmland effectively, a couple of things need to happen. The first is that we need to do an inventory, much like we did with our conservation land. So that's the first thing that we're undertaking right now. We directed staff to do an inventory, and they're going to be partnering with some of the same folks that did our conservation lands inventory and others to develop that inventory. And that will look at things like development pressure and goods and soils and location and all of these different things that we think about when we're trying to think about local food. It will still have some of the conservation components in it as well. And then they'll sort of prioritize the areas that we know we need to protect, which will look a lot like the way our green conservation map looks swooping around the eastern side of the county. This one will look much like swooping around the north, and that's where they will overlap a lot, is up in the north around the Santa Fe River, because the soils there are really beautiful because they're old riverine soils, and then wrapping around the western side of the county, Alachua and Newberry way, and down to Archer near Watermelon Pond and the Lee property and some of that area. We know that that's the case, but we want to do the study to have real data to point to and to have real information. And then from there, also develop criteria, much the way we developed those criteria for conservation. And luckily, obviously, conservation is still, and water protection is still a major component of all that we do. That's the main goal of wild spaces to begin with. So that will be a key priority criteria. But additionally, these issues, these things like soils, and proximity to development and things like that will also come into play. And luckily, there are a number of communities that have already done programs like this that we can look to for best practices. So they'll do some of that benchmarking and bring forward recommendations along with the priority list of the kinds of criteria we might use to vet agricultural lands. What we haven't decided and we don't know is, well, I guess the other thing I'll say is that with our agricultural lands, we want them to stay in ag, right? I mean, ideally, we would like that ag to be sustainable agriculture. We would like them to be using regenerative agricultural practices. We would like them to be adopting water conservation initiatives, and it's not a separate topic, but it is a whole another piece that we need to be thinking about from a policy perspective. This program won't tackle that. It doesn't allow for tackling those kinds of things, but I can talk a little bit about that afterwards if you want me to. But what this can do is provide agricultural easement dollars. And that means essentially what we're doing is buying the development rights. So we wouldn't buy the property fee simple. We wouldn't own the property. The farmer would continue to own the property, but we would be buying the development rights and putting into the easement what isn't allowed to be done on that property. And so it gives us a chance to negotiate, to protect the agricultural heritage of the property and not allow for them to build houses or commercial density on the property. And that allows them to realize some of that development value, get some of that economic benefit from the property without actually doing the development, and hopefully continue with agriculture. Right now, there's an unprecedented amount of money. It's like bizarre how much money is floating around out there between the Florida Forever program, the Rural Family Lands program. There's a couple federal programs. There's so much money right now for agricultural lands conservation that like time is of the essence with some of this, because we can get matched for almost every dollar we've got if we do it soon. So getting the study done this year, getting those priority areas and starting to really move in this area is going to be pretty critical. I will say our staff have already done some of this, right? In the areas, like I said, up there by the Santa Fe River, there's a lot of overlap where our conservation priorities and our agricultural priorities will overlap. We don't have those ag priorities yet, but we know. And so already we have purchased, in fact, one of the largest purchases we've ever done was the Hitchcock agricultural easement. And we bought an easement on thousands of acres right on the Santa Fe River. Wow. For the Santa Fe River Ranch. And that was Hitchcock's ranch. And so that was a really important purchase, but it wasn't, again, it wasn't fee simple. We just bought the easement from him. So they still own the property and they are still raising cattle and using it for agritourism and growing trees, growing pine trees. Yeah. I thought I heard somebody. I didn't know if there was a question.
No, I just said, it all sounds terrific. Keep going. Tell us more.
Yeah. So I think that once we get that study and the recommended criteria, the first step will be to adopt all of that, to like acknowledge that study as a priority area and to figure out how to incorporate it into our comprehensive plan the same way we did with our conservation and open space element. We have elements that talk about local food and agriculture, incorporating this into our comprehensive plan, and then thinking about how we want to prioritize funding for this effort, which is a difficult conversation to have, right? Because I just told you how many lands we already have that haven't been protected, and that's not including any of this land. I mean, it might be including some of it where there's overlap up there by the Santa Fe River, like I said, and some of the eastern areas of our county do have some good farmland over by Hawthorne and areas like that. But by and large, these things aren't going to always overlap, and so they will be competing. And it's a difficult conversation to have, right? About how do we share dollars, how do we split dollars even further, and how do we take, that 80% of 188, somebody that's better at math than me, please do that, and then decide, what of that are we going to dedicate specific to ag versus so that comes out to like 150 million. So of the 150 million we have, are we gonna carve out part of it just for ag? Are we gonna end these criteria and make a separate pot? Are we gonna have the two programs running concurrently, and just whichever come first and whichever willing owner comes up and whichever projects happen? How do we want to approach that? And that conversation has not been had yet, but I believe it will be had once we have those priority areas and we're able to see kind of how much we have and what the overlap is, and we're able to do some of that analysis with regards to the ag lands that we just did, conservation lands, and I shared with you. I can say a little bit about my soapbox on ag stuff, which is that if we invest in agricultural lands, but we don't invest in agriculture and food systems, then we're going to be in a pretty bad way fairly soon anyway, because a lot of our farmers are aging and most of them don't have younger people that want to come and farm. So in addition to protecting our agricultural lands, some of them are willing to just sell their easements and then let their family live on the land and own a big wide open space. And that's fine. They could plant pine trees or something that's really low maintenance. That's great for us. That's low impact agriculture, and it will help with the recharge areas and continue to protect that land in perpetuity. But it does not contribute to food security for Alachua County or to our local food system. And so from my perspective, we also need to be thinking about, one, how do we support young people that want to farm and get them excited about farming in Alachua County? Two, how do we match them with land? How do we begin to create programs where if we have a farmer that has an easement that isn't going to be farming it and his family isn't going to be farming it, that we create a mechanism for them to lease that land to someone who does want to farm it? And then the last piece is, how do we also, well, there's two other pieces. I think of it like a stool. There's the land, there's the farmers, there's the practices, right? So we also want to incentivize good practices. We want our farmers to adopt sustainable practices. We want them to use the best technologies for water conservation. We want them to use organic fertilizers and to think about building soil organic matter instead of having to just dump fertilizer on their properties, things like that. We want them to use rotational grazing practices, things of that nature. And oftentimes the reason that farmers don't do some of those practices is because they're expensive. Just changing out irrigation can cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Putting up fences to do rotational grazing can be very expensive. And so creating incentives and opportunities to pay our farmers for ecological services, we pay them for their products right now, and we pay consultants for services all the time. And I think that our farmers are doing a lot more for us than just growing us food. They're protecting our environment and they're stewarding our environment. And I think we have a responsibility to figure out how we quantify that and how we look at protecting things like biodiversity and soil carbon and water quality and quantity become something that we can monetize for them to make it another product, if you will, that they sell from their farm. This is called payment for ecological services, and it's a growing field. I went to a conference in Washington, D.C. this past November that was about this, and learned a lot, and will continue to learn a lot about it and try to think about the ways in which we might be able to do some of that work. I think there's going to be some decent grant money out there for work like that. And there actually is already some through our water management districts and our soil conservation services, and NRCS already are talking about doing these things and wanting to do these things and have some money. So how do we partner with them to attract that money to our county? And then last and not least is the infrastructure. So we have the farmers, we have the land, we have the practices, and now we need the infrastructure so that those farmers can actually get that product to market. Because right now, a majority of the food that's grown in Alachua County is shipped out of county, and frankly, it's shipped out of country, or at least out of state. I think we're 5th in cattle and 3rd in goats or something like that. I mean, we have a lot of what we do is meat production, but almost all of those animals are sold at auction, and they're shipped out to Nebraska, where they're fed out in confinement feeding operations if they're cattle. And then they get processed in a giant slaughterhouse and they're shipped back to us in cellophane. And they get shipped all over the world. And that's our water and our natural resources and our soil in the form of grass that got fed to the cows, like going right out of our county and never coming back. And in addition, we're also shipping the fruits and vegetables. Luckily, the fruits and vegetables that we have here, a lot of those farmers are selling pretty regionally, but we don't have a lot of them, and a lot of them are shifting quickly over. And that is true of the mixed and diverse vegetable farms. Of the farms that do like sweet corn and watermelons and blueberries, those are going all over the world. And so we need infrastructure here locally. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have USDA inspected facilities for people to be able to process their animals and sell it wholesale, and have it be a small facility that's managed well and humanely so that the animals are treated like living creatures instead of like commodities. And we don't have a food hub is another term that's really popular. And that's essentially a space that aggregates vegetables and fruits from local area farms so that they can be easily sold wholesale, and that might do some processing of them or some grading of them to make it easier for wholesale buyers to access them. It might even be doing some distribution. Different food hubs look differently, but many states and communities around the country have built these food hubs in order to support local agriculture and make sure that we have the infrastructure that allows our farmers to access these local markets. I guess the final piece I'll say is that our markets have to be there too, right? We need people to buy the local food. And right now the conversation about food is a pretty challenging one, because our land grant universities did a really good job at what they were told to do. They were told to make food abundant and cheap, and they did a really, really good job of it. And in my grandparents' generation, we spent upwards of 30 to 40% of our income on our food. And so it's about 30 or 40% on your home and utilities, and about 30% on your food. So 60% of your income was tied up in your survival. And then you had, another 30% or so for everything else. But now we spend less than 10% of our income on our food. I think it's closer to 6% at this point. And so that, that difference in what we spend in our food, it didn't just disappear. That money just didn't like evaporate, and I always like to ask my students, like, well, where do you think it went? Especially my students I'm like, who's taking economics? And they raise their hand. And then I'm like, okay, so what do you think happened to that money? Like, where did it evaporate to? And usually I get a lot of blank stares. And then I ask them if they know what an externality is. And you sort of see their light bulbs go off, and they quickly realize, like, oh, right. And an externality essentially means something we're not capturing on our balance sheet. Right. And so essentially what we've done in making food cheaper is we've externalized those costs to our environment and to people.
Hmm.
So the way that we've done that is we make food cheaper by growing monocrops in large scale and using fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, and by exploiting labor and not paying fair prices for the people who are growing our food, picking our food, distributing our food, and serving us food. And so and to our health, we're also externalizing those costs to our health, because the food that we're growing is a lot less healthy, and a lot of it is food that has to be processed, things like corn and soy and wheat, and those things are very calorie dense, but they're not very nutrient dense. And so we end up paying the price in heart disease and diabetes, and so we're paying it in healthcare bills and the hospitals, and we're not paying it at the grocery store. And those are really hard things to like connect the dots for, right? Because nobody like directly pays for environmental damage. I mean, they're paying it in their taxes, or they're paying it, in having to live in substandard conditions and breathe bad air, drink bad water, but they're not paying it at the register or on their checkbook. Same with healthcare costs. They might be paying some of it, but they're actually paying a lot more of it because we're subsidizing so much healthcare for people who can't afford healthcare. And those are the people who are the least able to afford food. And so as we begin to talk about shifting our food system, we're talking about shifting it back to a situation that incorporates all those costs and that really recognizes that our food needs to be sustainable for our environment, fair and healthy for the people who are growing it and taking care of it and processing it and serving it to us. And it needs to be something that's transparent so that we can actually influence and make decisions about the way that our food gets to us and how it's treated. And in order to do those things, it takes money. And so those conversations can be really, really difficult because there's many, many people in our community who can't afford to feed families, even now with the price of food the way that it is. And the idea that local food is important but might be more expensive is a difficult conversation to have. And so I think the last piece of this that needs to happen is, sort of both education, but also coming up with really good programs that allow us to figure out, to be honest with you, how we use existing policies and programs, things like SNAP benefits, things like healthcare prescriptions, to prescribe healthy food, and to use SNAP benefits to buy fresh local produce instead of buying commodities at the grocery store and things like that. And so those programs are also happening in small ways here and in big ways around the country. And so doing some of that is going to be a big part of this big picture for ag and food systems as well. I just gave you a lot. I gave you like my entire semester's worth of lectures for my students in 20 minutes. So I apologize, but that's a lot. And I didn't even talk about equity, really. I talked about people in the fields, but I could give a whole nother component of that. But, a big part of this is also that who we've asked to grow our food and who doesn't have access to land, and who has rights and who doesn't in our food system. And the fact that the majority of people who are caring for our food, growing our food, picking our food, can't afford the food that they're growing. So with that, I'll stop and I'll open it up to questions or comments or cheap shots. Molly.
Jay, you want to run through the questions we have on the chat?
Okay.
Sure.
Oh yeah, if you can do that, that would be great, because I'm on my phone tonight. My computer decided it wanted to run an update right when I got on with you all. So
We have some comments in the chat. Is that what you meant?
I think so. And I think, so Janice has her hand up too. Why don't we start with Janice?
Okay, good. I'll do it then. All right. Janice, your hand is up. Why don't we start with you? And then we'll go to some of Jeff's comments.
Super. Thanks
go
so
ahead.
much for being here, Anna. You are just always such a wealth of knowledge and information. Going to local farming. Having local farmers is way, way, way high on my priority list of the many priorities. And I've been supporting Swallowtail Farm specifically since they moved to their new location, because as you know, they are they do it all. They do animals, they do the compost from the animals. I mean, they really have the full circle, and I've really been eager to support them. I recently went on a tour of Siembra Farm, and at that farm, I had the opportunity to ask the farmer, and perhaps this shows how naive I am. I said, do you grow more food than you can sell? And he said, absolutely, always. And it just broke my heart to think that these farmers are out here growing so much absolutely fantastic, delicious, nutritious food. So the concept of the food hub is a real big deal to me. Can you tell us, like, is the food hub and that kind of large scale access of the public or the wholesalers to the produce from our farmers, is that in the conceptual stage? Is it on the planning books? Where are we with that?
So, I mean, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to give you the short version just for the sake of not boring everyone, but I could talk about this for hours and hours, but the short story is this. It's been something that's been worked on at fits and starts in our community. It's a little bit of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. I've spent most of my career working on this idea. And But I've been working on it from the demand side. So we have to have the demand to buy the product in order for the farmers to be safe growing the product. Because the last thing that we want to do is, one, ask farmers to grow food and then it gets wasted. And then they go under because they're growing food that they can't, that they've spent money on and they can't sell. And the second thing we don't want to do is spend taxpayer dollars or anybody's dollars, whether it's private sector dollars or tax dollars, on a food hub that is going to fail because we don't have customers for that food hub. And so I've been working for a long time on the demand side. And what I mean by the demand side primarily is institutions, because our institutions are our large food purchasers. So if UF decided to buy 25% local tomorrow, it would transform our food system. But they won't. And I've worked on that since I started at the Office of Sustainability, and I tried to get it into their last contract with Aramark. When I helped negotiate that, I tried to get it in this contract with Chartwell's. And at no time would they make any kind of major commitments to local food or like a hardcore definition of what local food means to them. And so they are doing more local food. And I will say the new company, Chartwell's at UF, is much more open and is more interested in doing work around local food than I ever saw Aramark be. So it's encouraging, but I'm only cautiously optimistic because I've just done this for so long, and I've had a lot of really disappointing setbacks in trying to work on these issues. We did the Good Food Purchasing Program is something that the county that I worked on in my role with Farm to School, and I worked with the school district to start a Farm to School program here. I helped write the grant that got the first Farm to School program started and hired Kelly Brew. And they started a food hub. So they had a food hub at the schools where they were actually buying from a bunch of different farmers, and they were using special needs students and adults that needed job skills training to do processing and packing of that food. And then they were sending it to all the different schools, and that's still happening to some extent. And so, they were buying things like lettuce and cucumber. So they were buying some stuff. The schools have started it. There's so much more that they could be doing. So much more. But they at least have started it, and they kind of have the beginnings of something going. The county, and then the school district committed to something called the Good Food Purchasing Program, which is a third-party auditing program that provides some transparency in what they're buying and 5 different values. And one of those is local. Another one is nutrition. Another one is sustainability. Another one is valued workforce. So that idea of like fair labor. And the last one is climate, I think. And so less meat, better meat. That's what the last one is. Less meat, better meat. So it's about animal husbandry and humane animals, and less meat all around. And so those are the 5 values that this program looks at, and it actually goes in and looks at all the procurement and it vets it. The school district went through that process and got a score. And we actually, the county asked the jail if they would please participate in the program. And they're the first jail, I think, ever to participate in the program. And so the county's jail, because that's our only place where we buy a lot of food, is going through that process of being scored right now. It's probably going to score terribly. Like, I can't even imagine how bad it's going to be. But it's a first step, right? And knowing where we are, because you can't go anywhere if you don't know where you start. You got to have a goal. I mean, you got to have a baseline to understand what your goal is going to be. And so that program will provide support and help to identify places that you can make changes, low-hanging fruit, no pun intended, and then also make connections with regional food hubs or other areas where we might be able to start getting more procurement going. That's in those 5 value categories. I'm actually going to Chicago in March for a meeting with other local elected officials that are working on this Good Food Purchasing Program and trying to move it forward in their communities to learn and share. So I'm excited about that, and I'll hopefully bring back some good ideas. But all that to say, it's scary for farmers. They're barely making it. Most of them, it's week to week, it's year to year. A lot of them take out a lot of debt, start farming, and it's always a crapshoot on whether they're going to be able to pay that debt off. And so the last thing that I ever want to do is create a situation where I put those farmers in a situation where the decision they made based on something that seemed like a good idea is the difference between them being able to farm or not farm. And I that happened already. I saw that happen with the University of Florida. I watched that happen with a farmer. And so I just don't ever want that happen again. And so we really need the demand and the supply. And that demand is going to be driven by people like you all being loud and being vocal about the fact that we need local food and we expect it and we demand it of our institutions and we demand it of our restaurants. It's like, because the restaurants say local and they write it on their menus and they like make it cutesy. I mean, we even have a restaurant in Tioga called Local Provisions. They don't have a single local thing I think they have like one local thing on their whole menu and it's like a cheese or something, And so I think a lot of this is about that. It's about consumer demand and like bringing up the education and really getting the momentum going, because without that, it's really hard to make the investment in the ed component. It's easier with the meat side, which is why the meat processing facility, which you've probably heard a lot about, is something that's on. And that's because we already have demand for meat here. Like the demand for local meat is real. And the amount of meat we grow far exceeds the amount of demand we have for local meat. So if we have a local processing facility that's USDA inspected, it will allow them to better meet that demand, because the bottlenecks in processing are so big that farmers are waiting 9 to 12 months to process animals, which if you know how much it takes to feed an animal, you can imagine that that's crazy. And then secondarily, it just means that then they can access wholesale and retail markets, and then we can start pushing demand. But I know that they have outlets for that meat. And so that to me feels like a safer, a more realistic start, because we have the demand and the supply kind of already there. And it's just a matter of not having the infrastructure to be able to support expansion of that. So not expansion of animals, but expansion of access to markets and more local, more thing here instead of getting shipped out to Nebraska, like I talked about.
Thank you, Anna, very much. We'll take Bella Lugo's comment or question next. Bella, go ahead.
Oh, well, I just wanted to make sure, because I know Jeff left a few comments in the chat. I don't know if you wanted to address those first, because I did raise my hand afterwards.
Does somebody mind, Jeff, do you mind reading them to me?
I would be happy to, yes. Would you like to hear about development questions or food questions or what?
We could do development first, I guess.
Well, there seems to be a lot of development money in the wings also, I would comment. And so you're talking about the west side, especially. I also had question about the Plum Creek east side type of development that could still occur. I'm sure that could break out again. It's possible.
Yeah. There's a lot of development money. I mean, it's a race. Conservation and ag versus development. And development's definitely winning the race. But in Alachua County, I mean, I think we're putting up a pretty good fight because of the voters and because of Alachua County Forever, and because we have wild spaces, public places, because we have money that we can, real money that we can show up at a landowner's door and say we have real money. And, a lot of these landowners, especially farmers, but all landowners really, most of them want to protect their land. They love their land. They don't want to see it turn into quarter-acre lots and houses. And like, that's not their dream for their property. I mean, there are some who just want to make money, bought the property as an investment, or interested in selling it and making the most money they can. But the majority of the people that I have talked to and encountered in this, particularly in this county, they want to protect their land if they can. But they also recognize that they can't just give it away. They need to be good stewards to their families of their wealth, and their wealth is tied up oftentimes in the land. And so,
well, I guess the Lee property is a good example of that problem.
Like, they would love to protect that land. And actually, I will say that, like, I think there's a good chance we're going to be able to. And that's all I can say about it.
Wow.
Jeff,
So
are you going to finish the rest of yours?
Yeah. I would say, you talk about the programs you're talking about and whether we can compete with the rest of the country when it comes, especially to, we aren't talking so much about exporting food, but if we get enough production, that's what'll happen and what we need. And I was saying that California certainly leads the country in terms of agriculture, but I was just reading about how poorly the valley is doing in California in terms of water availability. They're way under in terms of their aquifer, and it's going to only get worse. So we do have a benefit there. We're doing better than California, I believe, in terms of our water if we protect it.
That's not
But-
saying much, Jeff.
What's that, Bill?
So you're
Just-
where we are in a situation though where we are the water. We are much like California. California and Florida are what we like to call the vegetable baskets of the country. Like we grow a lot of the specialty crops, things like tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and blueberries and strawberries. And
Nuts.
so in a lot of those, we're in the top 10 of production in almost all of those areas. So, and when California goes dry, they're going to come to Florida. And we're not just fighting like that piece of it, like, or I don't necessarily want to use the word fight, but it's not like we're just trying to think about how do we protect our farms for local, resilient, sustainable agriculture versus being converted to large industrial agriculture that's going to come. But also a lot of that is being bought up by multinational corporations. So it's not even owned by individuals anymore. It's owned by large, very large corporations. The consolidation of our food system is insane. 86%, I think, of our of animal processing is now run by 4 companies. 4. And it's a real problem. It's a problem. It's such a bad problem that the federal government is now focusing on it and now starting to pour grant dollars into relocalizing processing of animals because they're realizing how bad the monopoly is and how difficult it is to break that cartel up when it comes to egregious safety violations and health violations and environmental violations, et cetera, et cetera. So this conversation that you're having is like, we're part of a national situation that's called climate, global situation is called climate change, and a national situation that's like, we're running out of land on the coast, which is where everybody wants to live. And we're fighting with development over those, and where there's a lot of really good arable land for agriculture. And so it makes me nervous when I see things like the Gates Foundation buying up land in Florida, and it's happening fast. And so, yeah, it's not a joke. We definitely do need to be thinking about ag land and protect family farms and agriculture, because I think I wish I had the numbers what we are in terms of our actual, like what number we are in certain production. I don't have that at my fingertips for some reason. I know that we're at $100 million in receipts for products sold. That's the value of agricultural products sold, $100 million in Alachua County. And that was for, sorry, my mouse decided to die, and I'm looking this up for you guys as I talk to you.
Well, on the local front, I was saying that of course we have especially in East Gainesville, we have this terrible problem with the food desert. No one likes to call it that, but the problems that we have in giving our Eastern relatives their nutritious food and at prices they can afford, and locally where they can afford it.
Yeah. So we're working on that a couple of ways. Well, I will say, one, you're right. I don't like to call it a food desert. A desert is a naturally occurring phenomenon that happens because of the way weather patterns happen. People in East Gainesville not having access to food was definitely not a natural phenomenon. It happened as a direct result of decisions and policies by people, and a direct result of racism in our country and in our decisions around the way we develop our communities. So it's there actually a woman named Karen Washington coined the term food apartheid, which I think is probably a little bit more apt, but less palatable. So
Yeah, the governor won't let you say things like that. So
no, definitely.
we're all going to be reported.
I know it's being reported too. But we are one of the things that I put forward when I first got into office was funding for doing what we were calling the corner store initiative. And the idea was that we would work with existing corner stores and or farmers and or community groups that knew their neighborhoods and their communities well, and basically from the ground up build a program that would provide better access to healthy and nutritious food. And actually, I should let Betsy talk about this because she's part of the team that's putting that project together, called the Fresh Food Pathways. And they're putting together a pilot of a mobile market that will be moving around to different neighborhoods in the eastern part of our county. And not just the eastern part of our county, but all the parts of our county, hopefully eventually, that have a situation where they have lower access to food. And maybe I'll pass it on and see if Betsy wants to say something about that.
Betsy, go ahead.
Sure. Just that we're in the process right now. Our plan is to have a really heavily community engagement component. Part of the reason some of these initiatives haven't worked in the past is because we haven't sort of struck the right balance between what the county or organizations can provide in terms of food and access, and what the community needs and what fits with their, I guess, their eating habits, their buying grocery habits, and what fits with their schedules. So the plan right now is to start with one mobile market location that we've kind of identified as a food insecure area. And then from there, sort of begin community conversations. And all the food from these mobile markets would come from our local farms. And the county would actually dramatically subsidize these food amounts. So if anybody's been part of a CSA, a community shared agriculture program before, you basically show up, you get a bag full of groceries, of actual plants that have been grown on a farm. Here locally, you get them from the farmer, and they're a little bit more expensive. To Commissioner Prizzia's point, we don't have the externalities attached to them that some of our cheaper food does. So what we'd like to do is drop that price so that it's accessible, it's affordable to low-income communities in Alachua County. And then once we kind of feel like we got the hang of it in the first location, we'll use some of the community connections that we've created to identify at least 2 other locations right now as the plan for this program.
Thank you, Betsy, very much. We have about 4 or 5 minutes. I'd like to invite others who have attended tonight to ask questions or make comments. Would anybody like to go first in this few minutes we have left?
Well, Bella had a question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I had more of a comment, and I apologize if you can hear background noise. I'm sorry, my roommates are in the other room. I just wanted to comment on, I just feel that this is a very important issue in the Gainesville area specifically, because I can only get like a college student's point of view, and I would think that really anyone would want access to local food. And I feel like something that I guess is, well, I think is very talked about, but is very important is also like kind of the, for lack of a better word, stigma, I guess, around local food. I feel like there is this stigma that local food is just this like unattainable, like very expensive, very like out of reach kind of thing, which is kind of a paradox in itself since it's supposed to be local food. But I do feel like, especially around young people, that there is the feeling of that it's unaffordable and that, it's only for, those who can get access to it and can afford it, when it really shouldn't be that way. And even though we have like so many farmers markets around and whatnot, I do think that a lot of people just keep resorting to regular grocery stores because it feels so like out of reach. And to an extent, I do feel there is like kind of in my classes, we talk about like the green premium, how more sustainable options are definitely a little bit more expensive. I do feel like that does apply to local foods, but I definitely feel that, there should be definitely an improvement in the system because of, the fact that both farmers and residents want local food to be sold and to be eaten. It's a lot better for you and it helps, the local economy and everything. So it is just a shame that things are the way that they are because, it shouldn't be that way. And realistically, it should be that we are getting more from the local areas, just sustainable for everyone, but that's not the case.
Oh, amen, sister.
Thank you, Bella.
I will say this, a couple things to that end that you can use to talk to your fellow college student friends. We have a lot of farmers markets in this town. We have multiple. I think there's one going on every Monday. There's one going on every Thursday. There's at least 2 going on every Saturday. I think we have at least 6 farmers markets in Alachua County, and probably more. And I'll just use the market as an example. It's at Cypress and Grove. It's in the Grove Street neighborhood. It's easily bikeable and busable from campus. And it is, I would say that the food there is, it might be a little more expensive in the grocery store, but it's not that much more expensive in the grocery store. And I think what they'll find, well, 2 things. One, a lot of students, because of their income status, qualify for SNAP. SNAP is a federal benefits program, and if they sign up for SNAP, they can use their SNAP at the farmers markets now. We now have SNAP stations at all the farmers markets. And so they can use their snapbacks and they can actually get them doubled, which means for every $1 they spend, $2 to spend at the farmers market. It's called the Fresh Access Bucks program. So they can actually get a lot more money bang for their buck at the farmers market than they would at the grocery store, because they get to double their money if they're SNAP eligible. And then secondarily, I would also say that a lot of the stuff at the farmers market lasts a lot longer because it was just picked. And so stuff at the grocery store was picked like a couple weeks ago and, shipped and processed and packaged and then shipped again, and then put on the grocery store shelves and sits there until you buy it. And so, if you buy lettuce from the grocery store, it might last a couple of days, but if you buy, lettuce from a local farmer, as long as you store it appropriately, it might last a lot longer. And so you have less waste. And so that's another condition. I think one of the things that I found working with college students on issues of food security through Field and Fork is actually a lot of it is just that the time and energy they have to do cooking. And that's something we haven't touched on much today, but I think is a big part of what that food hub could be doing is making food more processed. So by not processed meaning like processed down to like junk food, but processed like already chopped up, already with a recipe card right there, like here's your beef stir fry for the dinner, and here's all the fresh local veggies chopped up, and here's the beef like already cubed, and here's just get your rice and you've got a meal, kind of thing, like making it more accessible for people who are busy. And making it the right size for college students, because oftentimes it's also a lot of food for somebody who's just trying to feed themselves. And I think our farmers tend to be targeting like family audiences. And so their bunches are like a big bunch of something. And it's like the student just wants like 2 of something. And so those are some of the things that we've been working on at the Field and Fork Pantry, is trying to make the produce that we grow on campus at the farm all goes to the pantry on campus, which is for students who are experiencing food insecurity. And we've been trying to think about ways in which we can make that more accessible for the students.
That was a great dialogue. We are a minute over time, but Bennett did have a question. So Bennett, would you like to re-raise your hand and make your comment?
Well, I had decided to pass, but as long as you've put me on the spot here, I would like to see from an action point of view, what little combination of lists can be provided so we know where these corner stores are going to be, where the vans are going to be, where these markets, when the dates of these farmers markets are in what locations. Just some information that would allow us to support this with money.
Mm-hmm. So once the fresh food pathways program gets started, we will definitely share that information broadly about where the locations will be and the times. When it comes to farmers markets, honestly, the easiest thing to do is literally to just Google Gainesville farmers markets or Alachua County farmers markets, and they will all come up. There's a number of different groups that have tried to put a list together of them, including UF. Their human resources work-life balance page has a list of all of the farmers markets. It's just worklife.hr.ufl.edu. I wish I could put it in the comments, but I don't have, and the libraries has a list. Yep. So lots of people have created lists of the farmers markets. But if you Google it, the list will pop up. And it has the times and the dates. And so that's a really easy way. And thank you for saying that, because really the best way to support local food is to vote with your dollar.
Great. And I'm going to reserve a spot to ask the last question, Anna. And that is, and you suggested at least partially an answer to my question. What are the contributions that a group like the League of Women Voters can make that have the potential, or if it's one has the potential to help you and others advance these notions that you shared with us tonight?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think Bennett hit the nail on the head, like spending dollars, like really like channeling your members to spend their money with local farmers and at local farmers markets, and to being loud about the desire to see our institutions and the interest in seeing that your tax dollars that are spent on schools and, you know, University of Florida and all these places, that they invest in local food. And when you say local family farms, like small local family farms, not large scale agriculture from South Florida, but real local farms, and really just beginning to put together positions on those issues and being vocal about them is going to make a big difference, because oftentimes it feels a little echo chambery for me out here sometimes that I don't have. We have a decent local food community that cares, but the broader education out there in the community about why these things are so important is really hard to do. So yeah, using your platform to do that education would be huge.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thanks to all of you who attended tonight. I think this has to rank as one of the most informative presentations we've had in quite some time. I can speak for everyone, I'm sure, when I say thank you again for your expertise and loud voices. We're pretty good at loud voices, and we're pretty good at figuring out how to spend our money. So we'll make those contributions. Thanks again, Anna, and
Thank you
best
so much.
of luck.
Thank you,
Thank
Jay.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Anna. Bye.
Bye-bye.
for now.
Bye.
One thing you can do is show up April 4th at 5 p.m. The county commission meeting will be talking about the meat processing facility. So that's one place where you can be April 4th p.m.
You got it.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks. Bye.